Hi guys, thanks for joining us today. Navigating divorce and separation. It's a topic that is extremely relevant all the time, certainly with our clients. And Ryan, co-hosting today, I'm sure it's something that you deal with on a regular basis too.
Absolutely. So that's they're the main thing that we do, and the main thing that I do in my team at Anderson's.
Yeah, it's really interesting that people don't set out to have this type of stuff happen, but unfortunately it happens to many couples around the world, and particularly in Australia. So we'll get into it. What we're doing is we are recording this today, so we will send copies of this recording to you so you can watch it again at a later point in time. The agenda today, I suppose, as the planner, I want to talk at a high level about some things, and it's not going to be a case study. What I'll do is I'll leave the case study to Ryan because you're the one that deals with this stuff through the courts, the legal type of conversation. But look, there's the agenda, and hopefully that you'll find some things that resonate with you. Importantly, there's a disclaimer. What we are about to talk about is obviously general advice only, and you shouldn't take any of this stuff as personal advice. In terms of the legal stuff, it's also educational in general.
That's right. So this is general legal information. It's not tailored advice, and it's not a substitute for that sort of advice.
Lovely. So look, there's a picture of me back when I was feeling a bit fresher than I am this afternoon. And I am the CEO here of Pride Advice, and I'm a financial planner. You're not alone. So statistically, you know, there's a reasonable chance that 30% chance actually that in first marriages, they end in divorce, and it doesn't improve. So for those of you that are on the line that maybe are in your second or subsequent marriage or relationship, it doesn't have to be marriage, but yeah, the stats don't get any better. So this is something that is around with a lot of people.
Absolutely, and that's just marriages. You add on de facto relationships, and there's a potential for people to have one or more separations they go through in a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I suppose part of this presentation today is, you know, it isn't necessarily advice. Advice is an information, and what we are to do, what we're doing today is giving you information. We are going to talk to you about things that you might need to consider that you haven't thought about in the past. There is no one size fits all with any of this stuff. It's a very unique situation where every case is dealt with on its merits, certainly from a legal point of view, and even as a financial planner. Every situation is different, and we're perhaps looking at financially what the implications are and how to make things work for people going forward. Ryan, I suppose for you, when you're talking about the family law, it's kids and all that type of stuff that comes into it as well.
Absolutely, and I think we all know someone that's gone through a separation and divorce. They might have some experiences, but everyone's different, so you can't rely on what your friend's gone through as advice.
Yeah, definitely. So this is what we think advice is. It is counsel. Counsel is coming from a space of knowledge where you have been able to apply the skills and you can use the circumstances that you've worked through in the past to provide wise counsel to people going forward. It's recommendations. It's recommendations that are certainly given in the best interest of you. There is no perceived or vested conflicts of interest when you are getting advice from a professional person. And these things are supposed to challenge you, change the way that you think about what may have been the case, what you thought it might have been about. And importantly, when you are a client, it's all about you. It's not about what's in it for anyone else. It's not about what is in it for your partner. It's about you. So it's really, really valuable when it comes to getting that personal advice.
Absolutely. Another thing with that is, I guess, with advice from friends and family versus a professional. Professional doesn't have a vested, interest in the outcomes there. So they're impartial and can help you through that.
Yeah. It's really interesting when we see people, perhaps for the first time, people come in and they do have an understanding. It's their understanding. It's their view of what is relevant and what's not. And a lot of this stuff is impacted by social media nowadays, and what you might resonate with, you might see more of. You might get fed more of that stuff through social media. You might pick up and resonate with things that you hear on the radio, or when you're watching television, you might be cooking a meal, but something comes up that pricks your interest and you put the tools down and you watch the TV. It's the stuff that you don't gloss over in the newspaper. It's the articles that you read. And so you do build up biases about what you think you do know and how relevant it might be to your situation. And because of those biases, you do think this must be true. This is the way it's done. And there's nothing else I need to know. I'm ready to go ahead with these things. But look, like the screen says, what good advice is all about. It's a jigsaw puzzle, and there's a lot of pieces that you don't actually know because you didn't know that they were there to put together. Putting one piece in the wrong spot means that the picture is not complete. And so really it's about knowing right from the outset, the sort of stuff that does come into effect and how it's going to impact, so that you can make the right decisions at the right time. And as the picture again says, navigate away from the dangers that are there.
And I think a good point is to get that advice early, because there's important decisions that are being made. Do you stay in the house? Do you leave the house? If you don't get your advice beforehand, you could make the wrong decision that can really affect what happens in the future.
Yeah, we've had situations in the past, Ryan, where somebody thought they had done a good job and they received an investment property, but the investment property had a large capital gains tax on it, and their marginal tax rate was large. So they hadn't factored those things into the settlement. And so what they thought they walked away with after tax was not what they actually walked away with. So it's really important to get that advice. So look, at the end of the day, divorce and separation, whether it's a financial, emotional, whether there's children involved, it's what is up for grabs at the end of it. And we sat down in preparation for this presentation. We thought, what are the types of things that we need to consider? We didn't do a very good job putting together the jigsaw puzzle, but we thought at the end of the day, the foundation is the division of the assets. And then we're going to talk about what assets are in and what assets are out. But at the top, it is the fact that the relationship is over. And at the bottom, it's how are these assets going to be divided, and the building blocks in between are the things that need to be taken into account.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people might jump from the relationships over straight to let's divide the assets. But what we wanted to point out was there's a lot of interim steps you can go through and important things that you don't want to overlook about your insurances, tax issues, your estate planning, your financial support moving forwards, asset protection, all those sorts of issues. So it's important not to just jump straight over those and move straight to dividing up the assets.
Yep, absolutely. So the considerations and the things to think about, the who, what, when, where, how, why will things be divided? There are a number of ways that assets can be held, either personally, and when it comes to personal, it could also be joint between couples. Assets that are held in trust or via a company. I suppose an extension of that is partnerships and those types of things with professional white-collar people. The company assets and the superannuation assets. And each of these things, each of these types of assets, I think there needs to be a different consideration applied to them in determining what the outcomes are going to be. Anything?
Absolutely. Well, one thing that came to mind as well was liabilities, so the debts. So we most certainly focus on dividing up these types of assets, but also, most couples are going to have some sort of debt, whether that's a mortgage, credit cards, personal loans, that sort of thing. Who's going to take that on? Are they able to? Those sorts of issues are really important as well.
One of the other things perhaps is if you're not hands-on involved in the company and there's a value there, but there might be a debt that has built up subsequent to you guys dividing that has been taken out of the business, and these things need to be forensically examined potentially to work out what was what.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the time. And so look, in terms of the future considerations, it's something that we see a lot of where people don't necessarily take this into account. Obviously maintenance, child maintenance, that's a big one. Everybody that separates that has kids, they know that they're going to be up for that. But whether your child is currently in private school, whether they intend to go to a private school, whether as parents you intend to send them there, or whether you intend to pull them out of a private school back into a public system and reduce the costs because of the separation, the spousal maintenance, all of those things are really, really important to take into account.
Absolutely. I think most people would generally look at getting a child support assessment, but they wouldn't think forwards about education costs, whether any more maintenance should be paid, and insurance as well. What happens if one of the parties passes away prematurely?
Yeah. Just on that point, with my ex, it was a very amicable thing, but I actually left some insurance inside of a super fund for her, paid it. So in the event that I did pass, I mean, we were amicable, but I wanted to make sure that she had enough money there to look after the kids should something happen to me. So I made her the beneficiary on that super fund. So they're the sorts of things that you could actually take into account. Yeah. So the percentages, Ryan, who does what, who gets what, what's the best way to go? And we've got 3 dot points up in the first one about the assumption is, do we get half of the house and the super and those types of things? Do you get more of one, less of the other, all of one, none of the other?
Yeah, that's a really important part. The percentages is always a major part of the process we go through and the advice we give, but that's not the end of it. You then need to take the next step, have a look at what the assets of the parties is in the superannuation and work out how does that fit with their assets and what they've got. Does someone want to keep a home that's going to be their entire entitlement, but they can't really afford to keep that? So those sorts of considerations need to be looked at.
Definitely. On a couple of occasions where one person has been the primary financial provider, and they may have a reasonable amount in superannuation, the spouse says, look, I think I want some of that super, which they're absolutely entitled to, but depending on their age, how are they going to live? If we're talking about people in their mid-40s, there's potentially 20 years before they can get their hands on that. And how are they going to live in the meantime and fund a house and do those sorts of things? So it really is, it's a personal situation that you have to look at. It's not a general.
No, absolutely. I mean, in certain situations, we might trade off a real entitlement to someone's super for getting a bit more cash. And that's part of the negotiation, part of the advice, but it's about tailoring a solution to the client that fits their needs.
Yep. So Ryan, I'm going to hand across to you. I mean, spectacular award-winning advisor, lawyer that you are. We'll move across into a case study to sort of try and apply some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a case study that I've put together, which is really just an amalgamation of some really typical, common type scenarios of people we'd see every day of the week. This scenario involves Ben and Jennifer, with Jennifer coming in to see me for some advice. So it's tailored towards Jennifer. Obviously, it could have been Ben. The advice would be slightly different, but the principles are always the same. So we look at their relationship. Started dating in 95, living together in 96, married in 2000, separated this year, 2021. So they've been 25 years of living together.
Fairly typical situation.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's probably one of the more common type scenarios. So they've got 2 children, Emma age 16, Max age 10, and Jennifer's come in for some advice after that separation. So we have a quick look at their assets in this scenario. So there's a property in Findon that's worth about $1 million, Jennifer thinks. It's got a small mortgage on there. It is owned in Ben's name, and it's where they've been living as a family.
Just point out that there are people that are not just in South Australia on this webinar. So, Findon and Croydon are both suburbs here in Adelaide, but I know we've actually got someone from Palo Alto on the line as well. So they're putting aside the values, and the values of the houses even here have probably gone up a fair amount in the last few months. But yeah, just don't worry about the locations.
Absolutely. So we do have clients around Australia and around the globe. This scenario, we've just chosen 2 suburbs in South Australia.
That's an important point you make, actually, Ryan, because when we were talking about this, there are some laws that are state-based. When it comes to family law, how does it work?
Well, family law is federal jurisdiction, so it's the same law around Australia. So, some people might have assets in Australia and in another jurisdiction, in which case we'd need to give them advice on the assets in Australia, looking at our law, but also perhaps liaise with a lawyer in their other jurisdiction about how the law might affect those assets in that country.
And so if there are, even nationally here in Australia, if there's people online from New South Wales today, are you able to help them, or do you have recommendations as to where they might want to go?
Oh, both. We can advise on and do advise on clients in other states, but we do have a network of trusted family lawyers. So depends on what the client needs.
Beautiful.
In this case, apart from their mortgages, there's no other debts. Ben has a share portfolio, but Jennifer doesn't know much about it. She just knows he's got shares, so that's fairly common. Ben's worked in the public service and has built up to quite a good income. In this scenario, it's about 190,000. And Jennifer's been a stay-at-home mum, so she's got no income at all.
Yeah. It's reasonably common to see this type of stuff.
Absolutely. And, can also see a situation where Ben's a stay-at-home dad and Jennifer's done her career. So every type of variation. In this case, there was domestic violence where Ben had isolated Jennifer from her family, from her friends, made her financially reliant on him, and checked her spending, sat her down, made her explain her purchases. And on one occasion, when she's spent money on the children's shoes, spent more than she was allowed to, been at a fight, and he's physically assaulted her, and that's what ends the relationship.
I suppose, domestic violence is terrible at the best of times, but with the lockdowns recently and people being forced to stay together, it probably hasn't helped these situations.
Absolutely, yeah. I think South Australia was one of the luckiest states, but the lockdowns have been really bad for anyone that's been in a domestic violence relationship, because you're literally locked in with the perpetrator for as long as the lockdown's in place for. So our first step with a new client like this is we look at their safety first. So we look at what referral sources we can send them to make sure that they've got that safety. So Women's Safety Service to look at whether there's a crisis plan that needs to be put in place or accommodation. There's also 1-800-RESPECT, a 24/7 number where they can get counselling. We discuss intervention orders and whether it's appropriate to seek one in this situation. Talk about whether they get Australia Post to redirect their mail, or might be able to get some assistance from their bank.
So with those intervention orders, I suppose as an ex-police officer, when we get called to domestic violence situations, the terminology has changed. They used to be called restraint orders, and then there were some protection orders, and now they're intervention orders. If it's certainly bad enough, but they haven't engaged police, is there a way that people can get these intervention orders done privately?
Yeah, absolutely. So if the police do the vast majority of them, but if they don't, for some reason they decide it's not something they're going to apply for on behalf of the person, then we can do it privately via solicitor. So, and we would give advice about whether we think there's a ground to do it, and if they'd like to go ahead, we can apply for that for them.
So guys, listening to this, even if it's just this slide alone, it may not apply to you, but if you do have a circle of friends where they are struggling with domestic violence, maybe just write this stuff down and either share this webinar with them, or just share the information on this slide with your friends so that they've got somewhere to perhaps as a starting point. Interesting.
Okay, so we've dealt with that safety issue straight away. Then we're looking at the urgent financial issues next. So that's the second step. In this scenario, we know that Jennifer's not working, Ben's got a good income, and he's just literally turned off the tap. There's no money coming through to Jennifer whatsoever. She's moved in with her parents, who are not very wealthy, just can't support her indefinitely. So we work through with her. She's also got some registration due on her cars, and basically at this point relying on charity to support herself.
This stuff's really important. It might seem like small fry in the big scheme of things, but no, it's the day-to-day. How am I going to pay this? How am I going to do that? There's not a lot of food in the fridge, and financially I feel constrained because I just don't know where to turn to. These things are really, really important for people's emotions. Absolutely.
So, Jennifer's not going to be thinking about, am I going to get $1 million or $1.2 million in 12 months' time? She's going to be worried about where she's sleeping tonight, the children, whether they've got food on the table. So these issues need to be addressed first.
This time of year, getting ready for Christmas, buying the turkey and getting some gifts and those types of things, all of these things, it's terrible at the best of times. Okay, I think that my screen has stopped, but now it's working again.
It's fine. So there's a few things we do. So we'll discuss with Jennifer about applying for Centrelink for support. She may or may not be entitled to that. And we do have people in our referral network who are experts in this area that can assist if there's any problems. We'll go through and get on the child support calculator with Jennifer and work out what sort of child support she should be entitled to and help her to make the application to the child support agency for that. The next thing we'd look at is spousal maintenance. So spousal maintenance is quite often overlooked, but in a situation like this where Jennifer's not working and Ben is on a good income, child support's not going to cover it. Centrelink's not going to cover all of her needs. So we look at her needs, what her expenses are, and how much additional money she needs, and compare that to Ben and his income, and do an assessment of how much money he'd need to pay her on top of that child support.
The interesting thing in this particular slide for me is we're looking at one example where it's the male that's working, it's the female that's not. It could be they're on reasonably similar incomes. It could be the woman that is actually earning more and the male's not. And so, I suppose we're just looking at one case study, but there's many ways this could be applied. Yeah,
definitely. And that's what I guess that's the point of what the advice and getting tailored advice is, that the principles, the law is always the same. The outcome is going to be different to every situation.
The dot point 6 down there, the caveat over both properties, that's really interesting because if there is someone that is earning more and it happens to be an investment property, then there's a fair chance that investment property is going to be in that person's name only. And so, to put a caveat over the property means that it does lock it away until it has been determined how the separation is going to go.
Absolutely.
That's probably a really important point.
About protecting the assets. So we do an assessment of we think Jennifer's got an interest in the property, then if so, help her lodge a caveat over that. And also accommodation, we'd be looking at getting her back into that Findon property and probably getting Ben out of it.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Property settlement.
Yeah, so that's the next step. So it's really only once those urgent matters are dealt with that we'll move on to the issue of the final property settlement, and everyone goes through the same 4-step process.
In terms of property, you just don't mean like a house in this. It's all property, all assets.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's just the term that we use, which describes property. But property is everything from houses, shares, business, interest, trust, superannuation, debts as well. So it's everything.
So what about a situation where your future ex-spouse has shares in a business that they may be part of?
Yeah, so if they own shares in a company, then those shares are probably going to have some sort of a value. So what we would do is usually arrange for a specialist valuer to value those shares so that we could put a figure on that, because that's essential for step 1 there of establishing the property pool. So we need to know what each person owns and what it's worth so that we know what the value of their assets are and what we can divide. Because that's all the court, all the law, all that we are able to divide is what they each own between them.
Yep. Dot point 3, making adjustments to the percentage for future needs. Can probably give us an example of how that is applied?
Absolutely. So to get there, we go through step 2, assess the contributions of the parties to arrive at a percentage. So in this case, it might be a very simple case and it's 50-50. Their contributions are equal. Then we get to that 3rd step to see, should that 50-50 be adjusted for any particular factors? And what we look at are their age, health, earning capacity, care of children, child support, those sorts of things. In this example, Jennifer's got the children living primarily with her. She's not working, he's on a good income. So those factors, the care of the children and the income disparity will lead to an extra percentage to Jennifer.
Yep. Makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay. This one's interesting. Everybody thinks that they've left something. No, they're not telling the truth about all the assets and stuff that may have been squirreled away leading up to the separation. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the important reasons why getting advice from a specialist family lawyer is important, because we know that you need to advise all clients that they've got a duty of disclosure, which means they've got to give the other person any documents and information about their assets and financial circumstances. So this is the part of the process that we go through with everyone. In this case, we want to know more about Ben's assets. So we'd ask him about bank accounts, loan statements, have a look at his super statement, tax returns as well. You can get a lot of information when going over someone's tax return carefully.
I suppose if someone decides to make additional contributions to super to reduce their taxable income, there's ways that they think they can get around it, but I suppose that being the sleuth that you are, you can reconstruct it.
Absolutely, yeah. We get statements at a number of periods of time and have a look at the contributions to it.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, this is a really important point. I guess one of the reasons why we're here today, which is, I'm limited in the advice I give to legal advice, and I can't provide financial advice. A lot of these questions, we're talking about people's finances and their assets. So we need to have a trusted financial advisor that we can work with to give them advice about what they're doing with their super, their expenses moving forwards, and those sorts of things.
Yep. I think the mortgage broker is an interesting one too, because if you are going to inherit the house with a debt on it, but you're not earning an income, having one party taken off the loan or rewriting a loan just in your name only, you've got to be able to substantiate the debt, don't you?
Absolutely. So it's really handy that we've got some good mortgage brokers that we work with that we can get our clients out to early on and know whether they can get the money to keep the home. Because if they can't keep the home, there's no point us spending 6 months trying to get them the home.
Oh, that's a good point. So yeah, if depending on everyone's circumstances, you need to really know what you're dealing with in the first place to know what to negotiate. There's no point getting 2/3 of the way through and then realizing, oops, backtrack, you've just wasted a heap of time.
Absolutely.
That's a very good point. Okay, so.
Yeah, another really important part is that the next thing I'll do is get them to see one of our estate planning specialists because divorce will invalidate the will, but separation doesn't. So either way, once you separate, you need to get a new will in place so that if you were to die, your ex doesn't end up with your estate.
It's very timely. Just recently, I saw somebody with cancer, and they had been living. They'd never formally divorced, but they were separated, and but this person had moved on and had been in a not living together, but they've been in a long-term relationship, but they never changed their will. And it was the ex that he didn't get along with that was still the beneficiary of his will.
Yeah, those sorts of things can cause real problems, and then look at challenging the will, and it's just cost, causing all sorts of things that can be resolved if they'd got in straight away and fix that up.
Yeah.
Okay, Marco. All right. So in our scenario, Jennifer repartners pretty quickly after separation. And as we often find, the children, learn about this pretty quickly and spill the beans to Ben. Ben gets angry, he's jealous, and starts making threats to Jennifer that he's going to get a divorce immediately and she won't get any assets because she was committing adultery during the marriage. But that's just simply not the case. In terms of divorce, you need to be separated for 12 months in order to do that. And all the divorce does is terminate the marriage. It doesn't divide the assets. It simply ends the marriage. And there is that 12-month wait. And also the property settlement, cheating, new relationship does not affect someone's entitlements. Unless we perhaps move towards those future needs in that third step. If they, if Marco happened to be a, tech billionaire, then that might affect someone's future needs. But it is a no-fault system. So, if there was a bit of overlap and some cheating that occurred, that's not going to stop them.
That's really interesting because this is where, when you're getting your advice or information from friends, and the relationship's broken down, and you're catching up, and maybe one of the reasons the relationship is broken down because there is either a suspicion or you've found your partner has been cheating and having an affair. And so your belief is that as a result of that, yes, you can take them to the cleaners and you can actually, get 95% of the assets, that type of stuff. Really what you're saying is, that stuff is almost put aside by the court.
Yeah, exactly. But I always ask the question though, because it gives me a good insight into how this case might play out if I know the emotion behind the separation and what's happened.
Yeah, it's that was a game changer for me, because I didn't quite understand that was the case. All right, so
next step.
This is, we thought we had this on at the end, because whether you are here today and you are second time or subsequent time around, or whether it's a bit like, I think my first time getting drunk was 17, and I swore I was never going to drink again, and it didn't actually happen. So I do again is probably quite far from where you're thinking at the moment, but these are the sorts of things that you need to have thought about potentially before you got into that subsequent relationship. So this is almost like before you do it next time, these are the sorts of things you need to take into account.
Absolutely. And I think perhaps once bitten, twice shy. Obviously, some of our clients are really quick to repartner, others don't, or take a long time. But blended families are very common these days. And that's another time you would seriously look at your estate planning issues. If you've each got children from a previous relationship, there can be all sorts of issues that need to be taken into account about that, such as how you own any home, what your wills say, those sorts of things. I can even give advice on prenuptial agreements if that's a path people are looking at going down.
I've seen examples of people coming in to see us, and in a subsequent time around, and they both have children separately, and they come in and they buy a house jointly. And whether there's an age disparity, whether one's healthier than the other, do you see potential issues with that?
Absolutely, yeah. So if they bought that house as, say, joint tenants, if one of them were to die, it would transfer automatically to the survivor. So it wouldn't go into their estate, so the will wouldn't have any bearing on it, and it can't be challenged. So we've seen examples of this where an asset has gone to the survivor and been completely removed from the children who were intended to get some benefit from that by the parents, but they made a mistake in the way they bought the home.
So in that example, an extension of that is both couples or both people said to me, oh, but that's okay, we've redone our wills, and that we've left all 4 children, 2 each, we've left all 4 children as the beneficiaries. So if I die first, my partner gets the house, but then the 4 children will ultimately get what's left of the estate going forward. And 20 years down the track, there might be a subsequent I do again.
Absolutely. That's you can't rely on the surviving spouse to keep that moving forwards for 10, 20, 30 years.
So they can change their will?
Yeah.
Interesting. All right, so look, I suppose the whole idea of today was just to give you a starting point. Now, whether you want to give us a call and have a conversation, whether you've actually got a professional on your side, whether you are just contemplating what your future might look like. Now, in terms of what is that next smallest action that you can take, and to do that, it's going to be a different answer for the people that are online at the moment. If you are in the midst of separating, the next thing to do is, like you said, get in early, go and get some advice.
Absolutely. And, it's pretty common that I'll give advice to someone before they even separate, if they're thinking about it. Usually someone knows there's going to be a separation, and people are getting in and getting advice beforehand so that they're ready for when it happens.
So asking for a friend, we're not married. We've been living de facto for 12 years. This doesn't apply to us.
Well, it will. It does. Absolutely. So, people might not want to be a part of it or not opt into it, but all it takes is one person to assert their legal rights, which are there in black and white in the Family Law Act, that, you'll be dragged into it.
I generally find that the two people in the relationship don't come to the same decision at the same time that we need to separate. Usually one person, whether you are the instigator and be careful, because you're a bit more advanced than the partner that you've either just told the news to or about to tell the news to, or whether you are the recipient of a partner that has further progressed emotionally than you. Now, these things are really important. So again, the answer to that question, what's the next smallest action, is going to be dependent on your personal circumstances.
Absolutely.
Guys, we've had some issues in relation to the chats. So look, the Q&A, what I suggest you do, if you do have any questions, we're going to send through a feedback to you guys as a result of this Zoom meeting concluding. You've got our contact details. If you just want to follow up with a phone call, just ask a question. By all means, we do encourage you to do that. And if you've got nothing else, look, keep us in mind. We are there to help you. There's no cost to that if you want to give us a call and have a quick chat at all. Equally, if you want to share this with your friends, feel free to do that as well. Hope you've gotten something out of this. I've enjoyed putting the presentation together with you, Ryan. I've learned some things myself. And
absolutely. Yeah, and I'm also more than happy to take a call if you've got any burning questions.
Lovely. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for that. And hopefully you'll have a nice life, but we won't have to speak to you later. Bye.
Thank you.